All right. Hey guys, thanks for joining. I have an amazing guest with me today, Sydney Neef. We went to high school together, and she is a financial advisor. Is that what you call yourself, Sydney?
Financial planner. Yep.
Financial
Same thing.
planner.
Yes.
Perfect. And so it's kind of a special day. I'm having her on the show for two reasons. One, of course, to make the introduction so that you can get to know her, learn about the importance of planning out your finances and doing your budgeting, managing your estate, especially if you're an entrepreneur. I'll tell you a little bit about my story with Sydney and all the great things I learned, which are all super helpful, but it's like drinking from a fire hose. And but secondly, because what I learned with working with Sydney is how relevant this message is. So Sydney, and many of the people who are tuning in from our high school, from our community, might know also about my friend Andrew Dolph, who was he graduated in '07, was the varsity kicker on the football team, was diagnosed for the first time about 2.5 years ago with a deadly cancer, an aggressive form of what's called sarcoma. Um, I don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of sarcoma, but it's a soft tissue disease, and it attacks your muscles and your limbs. And since his first diagnosis of that disease, he's had uh, half of his right leg underneath his kneecap removed, and it after a year of remission, in January 2023, he found out that it's come back. It's spread through his lymph nodes into his lungs, and he's now battling that disease again for the second time, and it's stage 4, not a great prognosis. We have received some good news lately. He seems to be doing well with the treatment, but um, he was an entrepreneur like me before he was diagnosed. He had a landscaping business where he lived down in Austin and was doing really well for himself. Um, and has two young daughters, both ages 5 and 6, and their names are Rainey and Ellie on his page. I have their pictures up there. They're beautiful young girls, and he ended up having to sell his business, and he didn't have a Sydney, unfortunately, in his life, and so he's a couple years older than me, so mid 30s, lower to mid 30s, and he didn't have life insurance. He didn't have disability protection. He didn't have, um, any of the assets that you've taught me about. And so now it's a hard economy, and we're sitting here trying to raise money for him, which I will drop the link for the for his fundraiser in the description of this podcast. So if you feel called, we do appreciate any and all donations. So that's the first thing here is to raise a little bit of awareness for Andrew's story, uh, but connect it to what you do, because I think for me, and maybe we can segue here, Sydney, is I think a lot of people my age, and maybe you yourself went through this, feel like we're invincible in a way, like you know unless it hits home, unless you see someone like Andrew, you start to think like, oh, like, that's worst case scenario. It'll never happen to me. But what if it does happen to you? Where are you left? And first off, I want to thank you for bringing those things to my attention, for kind of looking after me in a way and staying on my ass because I've been busy, and I know that I'm perpetually behind, and uh, I've missed meetings with you and had to reschedule stuff, and you've been great by just staying on top of me and really educating me. And so I just want to open the floor, introduce yourself, but really like educate the audience, because I guarantee you there's a lot of people out there who are going to be listening to this, and they're going to be kind of like Andrew was and like I was, have no idea about the risk and what can happen if you don't start being proactive about your financial health.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on this podcast, first and foremost. I really appreciate it. And honestly, I've really enjoyed our time together, getting to know your story, what your goals are with your family, and how we can be a resource to each other. It's been a great process working with you, even through your missed meetings. Um, which I'm just kidding. You really didn't miss any. That's the nature of this business. We're always busy. If you weren't busy, we wouldn't have to have these conversations, right? Um, but so a little bit about me. I do specialize in what's called comprehensive financial planning, which can mean 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people, just depending on the stage of life that you're in. So your stage of life doesn't look the same as someone who is just getting started and graduating from college. And that person's stage of life isn't going to look the same as maybe their parents who are getting close to retirement. But my job is to get to know my clients, get to know you, what's on your plate, what your short term goals are, what your long term goals are, and how we can help you achieve those financially. And whenever we're talking through the financial planning aspect of things, we always want to start with the end in mind and work our way backwards. So we want to know what your goals are long term, how we can achieve those, and that way we have a plan for retirement. But the problem is, whenever you're just focused on saving money and accumulating your assets for retirement, you and most people don't typically think about their greatest asset, which is their ability to earn an income. And that is the driving force to being able to save for retirement. So
And just
whenever,
real quick to spell it out, it's your health is what she's referring to. I think your ability to earn is tied to your health. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that.
yes, it is directly tied to your health and your ability to go to work and earn a paycheck. So my very first question that I typically start out asking each of my clients is, what is going to happen to you if, one, you don't make it home last night to dinner? What is life going to look like today for your family? Because just like you, Sean, most of my clients they have a wife or a husband, they have kids that rely on them. And most of the time, the parent who is a homekeeper or who is primarily responsible for taking care of their kiddos, they're reliant on the working spouse's income to get them to retirement and through retirement as well. So not only do we need to look at the risk of what happens if you don't make it home last night due to premature passing, but really the biggest driving force to your financial plan to offset its course is going to be your ability to earn an income and go to work tomorrow. So what happens if you are mentally or physically unable to earn a paycheck and go to work tomorrow? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I'm assuming someone putting me out of my misery to help my family probably isn't the best case scenario.
Well, I mean,
Even
if
if
you
I
have
were.
good life insurance, maybe.
No, yeah, and I think it really hits home not only with what's going on with Andrew, but it really resonates with me. For people, maybe you don't have an Andrew in your life, or that message doesn't resonate with you. But I know for me personally, is I got into this entrepreneurial dream with the goal of creating a legacy and creating a better life for my family. And there's a lot of things that I feel like I'm in control of, but there's also things in life that we're not in control of. And unfortunately, like, bad things happen to good people every day. And when you ask that question of what would happen if you didn't make it home, um, it's a very sobering thought, right? Because I'm in good health for my age. I take good care of myself, and uh, I'm dedicated to my nutrition. I'm dedicated to my exercise and my fitness. Even like I even used to vape, and it's been a new change. But when you kind of went through all the different things of life insurance, I made the decision. You know what? Like, it's time to stop this. I don't need any bad habits in my life anymore. And but you know, it doesn't mean that someone can't sideswipe me on the freeway. Um, and some things just happen, like with Andrew. Like, it doesn't mean that for no reason other than just something unknown to all of us that I go and get diagnosed with some debilitating disease. Um, and I think what's also intriguing, and I don't want to get too into the numbers, but like the rates of autoimmune disease, the rates of cancer, obesity and diabetes rates, heart disease, all those rates are on the incline in the United States. So this really isn't it won't ever happen to me. It's almost a question of when, not if. I mean, do you think that's a fair statement?
Definitely. It's not a matter of if something happens to me, it's a matter of when something happens to me, what is my plan for when that happens? And that's what my first job is as a comprehensive financial planner, is to mitigate that risk and take that off the table of when something happens, we know we have something set in place to be able to protect your family, whether that is cash on hand, whether that's protection through an insurance policy. We can evaluate that and make sure it fits your family's need. But it's not a matter of if something's going to happen to you, because we're guaranteed two things in life: to be born and then to pass away. And honestly,
Yep.
to get sick. Um,
Yep.
Hopefully, not an illness that's going to take us out of work long term for 2 years. But on average, I mean, the average 35-year-old has probably about a 69% chance of never becoming disabled. But what if you are that 31%? What
Yeah.
if that happens to you? What is your family going to do tomorrow? So we are able to take actionable steps today to prevent that while you are young and while you are healthy. So that way, if something happens to you or when it does, your family's protected. And then you can continue growing your assets for your retirement planning.
And that's a really sobering statistic. So 31% become disabled at some point, and it makes sense. But that's 1 in 3. To put that in perspective, so line 3 people up, one of them is going to become disabled at some point in their normal working career. Um, and I think that leads into one of the most beneficial things that you educated me on, was this idea of disability protection, which is a part of your plan, um, at least for me, but I presume it would be part of most entrepreneurs' plans. Can you talk about that? Because I think at least a lot of people at least have an idea of what life insurance is, but I don't think many people, I didn't, have a very good grasp of disability protection and what that is.
Definitely. So, whenever we're talking through disability income protection, there are two, or really there's one type that most people are familiar with, especially if you are an employee and a W 2 worker like you used to be, Sean. Most
Mm-hmm.
people are familiar with short term disability. That's going on FMLA, but that's not really the biggest deterrent in your financial plan. Really, the biggest risk that you have is what's going to happen if you are out for 2 years, 3 years. What if you can never return to work? So that's when long term disability is going to kick in. Now, long term disability insurance, I'm going to talk it through for the employee perspective first, and then I'll talk it through on the entrepreneur side, because there's two different ways to go about it. But if you are an employee and you're listening to this, typically you can opt into it whenever you have your open enrollment. You want to make sure you're maximizing your long-term disability that is provided to you through your employer, because that's typically going to cost you pennies on the dollar. Now, if something were to happen to you, there's going to be an elimination period. Typically, we see the elimination period is anywhere between 90 and 120 days, depending on the type of insurance policy that is taken out through the employer. So what that means is the policy plan isn't going to pay out until day 91. So 3 months in or 6 months in on day 121. And then whenever you do start receiving benefits from that, you are no longer receiving a paycheck from your employer. You're now receiving a paycheck from the insurance company. And when that happens, at least in the state of Texas, I don't know what state you're viewing from right now, but in the state of Texas, the max an employer can cover in long-term disability is going to be 60%. So if you have to make a long-term disability claim, you're going to have to wait 3 to 6 months before it's going to pay out. And then when it does pay out, you're going to see a max reduction of 40%. So your income, let's say you're used to bringing in $10,000 a month. That is now going to be reduced to $6,000 a month. If it takes your family $8,000 to run your household, how are you going to supplement that income?
Right.
Walk me through what would happen, Sean.
Yeah, I think your wife or spouse would be asked to do things that may be unrealistic. Otherwise, you'd be looking at ways to sell the house. Maybe we'd be in a situation like Andrew and trying to like put up GoFundMe's and hope the community rallies to our support. And it's not a fun situation in any shape or form to be short money, right? So, what typically is going to happen is it's unsustainable. And I know, like, habitually, looking at my own life, what really happens is people are going to fill the gap on credit, using credit, trying, like, hoping, which isn't necessarily an always bad thing to be optimistic.
But hope is not a strategy.
But right, hope's not a strategy, and if you're not able, and you're increasing your risk, and if you're not able to sustainably fill that loss of income, then you're really headed down a path of financial ruin.
Definitely. And so that's one of the areas that we want to eliminate the risk. So whenever I sit down with my clients, we can walk through, if you were to become disabled tomorrow, you would need a lump sum of, let's call it $1.2 million. And you would have to invest it and get an average return of 5% on that investment to combat that loss of income over time through your retirement. Now, most people, whenever I sit down with them, they don't have a lump sum of cash sitting under their mattress of $1.2 million to just be invested. So the way we can protect that is by applying for what's called disability income protection insurance. It's an insurance product that is very similar to just like your car. Most people, whenever I ask them what their greatest asset is that they own, they'll either say their home or their vehicle, which I think is crazy that vehicles have equity right now, only in 2023. But most people will say their home or their vehicle, and you have no problem insuring your home or vehicle for $250 or more a month, right?
Yeah.
Because you're driving every single day. What happens if you get hit? It's not a matter of if you get hit, it's a matter of when you do, you want to be able to get it fixed, right? So that's what disability income protection insurance does for the average person. We can supplement whatever you don't receive from your employer. So let's say they cover 60% here in Texas, then we can supplement 40% privately. Now, we can't get you all the way up to 100% of your previous take-home income because we want some sort of incentive to return to work, right? But we can get you to 99%. So then that's going to help, because whenever you become disabled, now you have taxable income from the insurance company. So that $6,000 that we have coming in now, that was originally 10, we're now paying taxes on it. And then we're going to have increased healthcare costs from that as well. So we can
Mhm.
supplement it privately to mitigate that gap, lower that risk. Now that's for the employee. If you are a W-2 employee and you have those options through your employer, you want to make sure you opt into it, and then we can look at supplementing privately. So Sean, you're probably thinking, I was an employee, now I'm a business owner.
Mhm.
What do I do? I don't have that offered to me through my employer because I am my employer. So what we have to do now is look at your overhead expenses, because now you don't just have your income that you need to replace. You also have other employees' incomes that are reliant on you being able to go to work. You have business expenses. So we need to look at what's called disability overhead expense for your business. So then that way we can make sure we can keep the lights on in the business and that's running. And then we also need to make sure that we're protecting your disability income protection of your income for your family personally. So now you have two types of disability incomes that need to be protected, one for your business, one for your personal. And since you are a business owner, the process looks a little bit different when we're going to apply for disability income protection than it does for the average employee. Because with the average employee, we can get a W 2, your most recent pay stubs. For a business owner, we need to look at your previous 3 years of tax returns. We need to know what
Mhm.
money's coming in so we can get an average. And most of my business owners, they are pouring their money back into their business because that's going to be the greatest return on your
Right.
dollar. So it's a little bit more complicated for entrepreneurs like yourself getting that coverage, but it is crucial that you apply for it. That way, if something happens to you, your business can keep running, your household can keep running.
That's right. And one thing I really appreciate about you, Sydney, and it kind of reinforces the idea of how you kept on me, is that yeah, it's a little bit complex. It's not easy, but like I was reflecting on that this morning about where I am on my own journey. Nothing worth having is easy, but I appreciate the fact that you're able to distill it down and make it at least simple enough for people to understand and understand the importance of these things. I it may be a poor analogy, but I love sports, and I think one thing that like dawned on me when you brought this up to me was I think we look at other people and sometimes we feel like maybe we're not worthy. And I know you're probably like, Sean, what are you talking about? I promise I can connect the dots. Is you hear about sometimes like Cooper Cup. I think it was a season or two ago. He tore his ACL. He was out for the season. I don't know. I don't know if he had this, but I bet he did. Being a professional athlete, professional athletes have this type of insurance. It may be called something different, but like you can buy insurance on yourself. That way, like if you were to tear your ACL, you can still get paid $2 million that year as a professional athlete. There's actually high school and college athletes doing this now in case they were to actually the former cowboy. A lot of it was inspired by what happened to him. Jalen Smith, I believe, the linebacker. He played for Notre Dame. He was going to be one of like the top draft picks, and he was in the championship bowl game, which is meaningful from a college, football national championship perspective, but is meaningless in terms of the NFL and in terms of like actually getting paid. And this was before the NIL, so there's no name, image, likeness, any of that stuff. And he completely thrashed up his knee, almost to the point where people questioned if he'd ever be able to play again. And I know that that's when that type of insurance got really popular in collegiate sports. These top NFL draft picks are purchasing insurance on themselves in case they get injured in college and can't play anymore. that they can still get a paycheck of some kind based on their talent and the value that they add to the marketplace and to their teams, right? And I think sometimes as business owners, everything starts small, right? We look up to these athletes and we feel like, yeah, it makes sense for them, but it doesn't make sense for me. Well, yeah, it does make sense for us. And like, we are worthy. Your wife is worthy. Your child is worthy. Like, you have to start living in the future you and planning for that future you. I mean, that's one of the number one ideas in peak performance, in self mastery, is if you want to become the person that you identify with in the future, you have to start today. And I think this idea of insurance and protecting yourself is a really good outward symbol of saying, like, yes, I'm willing to take responsibility for my future family, for my future children, for the future version of myself. Um, because if you don't, we've already talked about all the risks and how you're really setting yourself up for failure. Um, the other quick story I can say is there's a guy I was going through his course a couple weeks ago, helping me with like copywriting. Um, his name is Chris Finley, and his business is called the Modern Warrior, and it's kind of like a blueprint for entrepreneurs that's geared towards men. Okay, and he talked about some of the same things I just brought up with identity and being your future self. Um, but one thing that happened to him, and fortunately, he was able to like pick himself up by the bootstraps, but not all of us have that opportunity. Is he was running a fairly successful e-commerce business, and he suffered a very bad breakup that led to like adrenal fatigue, or another word for that is burnout, which is like a documented mental health uh, disease or mental health, like it's a health related issue um, that can lead to disability. And he was out of work just because he was so burnt out and going through all the mental, psychological, just darkness of what had happened to him, that he lost his business because he didn't have these assets in place. He didn't have these plans in place. Um, and, I'm putting you a little bit on the spot, and I'm sure it depends on the the plan and the premium and all that, but it's pretty much known there's a mental health crisis in the United States. I think like the last statistics I found were like 50-60% of people are dealing with some form of burnout. um, and I know entrepreneurs deal with that. Is there options where you can get disability protection and income protection even for like mental health issues?
Now, I know you can make a claim.
Uh-huh.
And depending on the diagnosis, the onset of the symptoms, it may or may not get approved.
Okay.
Mental health is one of those, it's kind of a fine line. I know after
Mm-hmm.
COVID, a lot of people have been more aware of their mental state.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't do the underwriting, I don't do the claim processing.
Right, right, right.
But if it's something that is debilitating and it's going to take you out of work for an extended period of time after 90 days or after your short-term disability pays out, then it's definitely worth making a claim. I know we had a client here with one of the other people in the office. I think I can tell this story, but they had a client who was a nurse, and she was getting migraines, and
Mm.
the migraines just became debilitating. So this isn't mental health, this is a physical element, but we know
Mm-hmm.
mental health is, there's a big push for it right now. So I think it still fits. But she
You probably just
started,
have to have a doctor.
yeah, you have to have documentation from your physician. Well, this
Mm-hmm.
particular client went to her physician for her migraines 2 years before she even made, or I think it was like a year and a half before she made the claim. Uh, And then her migraines just got worse and worse to the point where she could no longer work. And
Hmm.
so whenever the insurance company went back through and did the investigation of when that illness onset really started, they went through the medical records and saw that it was a year and a half ago. And so the insurance company went back and paid all of those benefits for a year and a half.
Wow. It's
And
incredible.
so
I mean,
it's
that's a powerful story.
yep. And that is honestly one of the reasons that whenever I decided to open up my financial planning practice, I wanted to make sure that I was going to take care of all of their policyholders. And just like this client experienced, they are going to do what's right for the policyholder every single time.
Yeah.
So, to answer your question, I don't know if mental issues are 100% covered or not. I think it really depends on the claim.
Well, I think I
But
think I think you covered it because a lot of times mental health is also tied to physical health. And
mhm,
I'll give you a really good example. So I was diagnosed with severe gastroparesis.
okay.
The nerve that goes basically down my spinal cord or something. There's some nerve ending that goes into your stomach, and it basically typically knows when there's food there and tells your stomach to produce the enzymes to digest the food and do what it's very important because that's how I get nutrition and cellular absorption in my body, right? Like the enzymes in your stomach break down the food goes into the nutrient from the food gets broken down and stored in the mitochondria of your cells. I don't know if anyone remembers mighty mitochondria and how important that is from a cellular energy perspective. And essentially, that nerve in my stomach is paralyzed, and so I have very severe digestive issues, um, and it manifests itself in depression and anxiety. And what's really crazy is this disease is more common in women. And at some point, I want to come up with some type of gastroparesis awareness, especially for women, because I would imagine there's a lot of women who wake up and feel exhausted and feel like they can't get out of bed. And everyone's telling them, oh, you're just depressed. You're just depressed. And I wonder how many of them actually have gastroparesis because that is the manifestation because what's happening is you're waking up and you're tired. Well, you're tired because those nutrients aren't getting into your cells. And then if you're waking up and feeling tired all the time, you're going to kind of naturally get anxious because you're probably not able to do much of anything. And then that anxiety finally turns into depression. And so, also the really crazy thing about gastroparesis is it only has like two drugs. One is FDA approved, but it's FDA approved as like a mental health, like antipsychotic drug that's very strong. And you have to sign like a black label, like FDA, like, yeah, if I commit suicide, I'm not going to make a claim. Um, and the other one is not FDA approved, and you have to order it from like a pharmaceutical out of like Mexico or India, and it can cause the side effect of that drug is it causes irregular heartbeat and heart murmurs. So I decided to decline any type of medication, and I manage that disease holistically through diet, exercise, sunlight. I write a little bit about it in my book that was published because that was one of the things that pushed me to, you know, getting into what I'm doing now, which is trying to help other people live life to the fullest, essentially. And the other thing that I suffered through was I had long COVID, um, and that was one reason why I went back to corporate America. So in 2020, through October, November, I had a very severe case of COVID. and it kept me down for like 2 weeks. I didn't have to go to the hospital, but I got really close multiple nights. And finally, like I like got like well, uh, didn't have fever. I could breathe more normal. Um, but Sydney, I couldn't work for about 6 months. And so like minimally. So I was very lucky. I was doing a different business, entrepreneurial, and I just, by the grace of God, gotten paid one of the largest checks I ever had, and it was enough money to hold me over for a year. Now, keep in context, I worked for about a year before I got that check, so it wasn't like money just came raining down out of heaven for me or something. I worked really hard for that money, but thank God it came at the time it did, and I got sick at that time. Otherwise, I would have been in the spot that you were just talking about of how the hell am I going to keep the lights on? Because I kid you not, for 6 months, I had to work my way back. I took daily naps. It got to the point where I told myself, okay, wake up, get out of bed, take a shower. That's a win. Okay, get outside for sunlight and take a 15 to 20-minute walk. That's a win. And then once I got doing that, I said, okay, I'm going to do 1 hour of work before I take a nap. That's a win. So think about someone going from working 10, 12, sometimes 16 hours a day, making 150, 200, and in this role, it was uh, a CPA 1099. So I was getting paid by the hour, making 150, 200, $300 an hour to just try to work 1 hour today. Just try. And that's a win. Because that's what it was like for 6 months. Now, what finally, I think, bolstered me out of it was my wife and I did what I think a lot of people did during the lockdowns. I started drinking alcohol. I didn't really become an alcoholic, but we drank wine, and the guy would come to our neighborhood with the big gallons of margaritas, and there's nothing to do, so it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Hey, let's turn on a Netflix movie and drink some margaritas, and hey, we can't really go to the grocery store. It's not safe. Let's order some good food off DoorDash, and we'll have PF Chang's every night. And I gained probably 30, 40 pounds
Man,
up
your
until that
COVID
time.
experience was so much different than mine. You were living the good life, it sounds like.
Well, I was very blessed in the fact that I was the busiest I'd ever been from a work perspective. And thank God, right? Because that old job, it took a long time to get paid. So I worked like 12, 16 hours a day for those 9 months. And then in month 10 in October, or month 11 in November, whenever that paycheck came, it was enough for an entire year. But had that timing been off, I would have been really, and that was one of the things of like, hey, like, what happens if I get sick? Maybe I should go back to corporate America. I just had a daughter. Like, maybe I do need a stable, consistent paycheck. And look, we can talk pros and cons of entrepreneurship versus corporate America. Some of it was lack of knowledge. And what does the Bible say about lack of knowledge? My people perish for lack of knowledge. Had I known about the things that you've educated me on, maybe I could have made a better decision and not had to go back, or not felt like I had to go back to corporate America. But yeah, hopefully I've illustrated some real life stuff that happens to anybody and everybody, and what makes what you're doing so important and so relevant to people's lives.
Definitely. And that is why the risk management conversation is the very first conversation that I have with all of my clients. Because without income coming in the door and without your family being protected if you were to pass away last night, then investments don't matter. You growing your assets don't matter if your family's not protected first. So that's why the foundation of financial planning is always going to be in mitigating your risk. And we're going to start with the insurance conversation. And then we can talk about the fun stuff of growing your assets. But until you're protected or until you have that lump sum cash of $1.2 million that's going to replace your earnings over the next 20, 30 years until you get to retirement, we need to protect that with some insurance, just like we would protect your home or your car. Let's protect your biggest asset, which is your ability to earn an income.
Yep. Well, hey, Sydney, I know we're coming up at the top of the hour, and I know you are extremely busy helping people, impacting lives, mitigating risks, doing all these wonderful, amazing things. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being such a great friend to me and my family. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for putting your message out there and being such just a genuine person. For all the listeners, I'm going to drop Sydney's contact information in the description of the podcast. I invite you to send her an email and get in touch with her, because she really is going to help make sure that when bad stuff happens, that there's going to be a way to get through it where it doesn't hurt so bad. We can't stop all the pain, but we can at least like be there with people as you go through it and stop some of the pain.
And then you would know that I'm on your side, fighting for you, advocating for you and your family's financial future.
I mean, just listen to that. Like, how could you not want Sydney on your side? So thanks again.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Sean.